Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for coming to a lecture that's going to be, I will say, fun. If I was going to say pure fun, but that's a matter of how much fun you think fun is. But it's not going to be material you're being tested on. I'm going to give you a little teaser. I could get in trouble. In fact, technically, if someone wanted to make an issue of it, I'm kidding, of course, I might be in danger of being fired for what I'm about to show you today. How could that be? It's Slides of Architecture by a famous.
What is it?
The reason I'm telling you that is because I've been told by certain people whose names shall remain off the record. I'm not telling you. Who decided that I shouldn't show slides that cover anything other than the exact years in which the course or exact set of styles that the course state guidelines say to cover? I'm not testing you on these slides. And if you didn't know about Julia Morgan before you took this class, I think knowing about someone as important as her is only a positive thing, especially when you're talking about, women who have been underappreciated in the whole art world for centuries. So I don't care if they want to tell me not to. I will tell you, I already talked to my union. I said, you have every right to do that. And to mention, anything else that's relevant as long as it's in the ballpark of the overall concept that the course covers. So since architecture is something you don't have to have written a paper about, right? There's a few of you still haven't got my second paper, or your second paper. I haven't received yet. So don't forget that you need to get that in as soon as you can. But I've received most of them, and it took me, because of the holidays, a little longer to get them, the ones I'm not grading, to the readers. By next Monday, I should have those grades back from you, or certainly no later than next Wednesday. But let's confirm something here, because this came up in the last lecture. The exam is on Monday, December 13th. So you guys get off the 15th, which happens to be my birthday, which I always end up giving a final. Yes, I'm giving a final in my in-person class in this building Wednesday night, but that's none of your concern. So it will be same time. Of course, I'll be at home, as you may have noticed, on Mondays when I do my Zoom lecture, and I'll send you a detailed information. But I will definitely want to get the first slide on the screen by about 10 after 3. So try to log in no later than 3:05 if you can.
Mark, what was that date again?
It's Monday, December 13th, and at same time, except that the exam proper will begin about 3:10. So don't be late, because it's in real time. And the reason, I think I've explained this, but if not, I will now, because it came up when I was talking to both a couple students from my in-person class, as well as one of my readers in the last few hours, about the fact that the in-person class doesn't have, a lot of extra time. When the exam is over, I give them an extra, it's called time and a half. Of course, you're allowed that automatically if you have something from the Office of Disability Services. But I give that to all my in-person classes now, because the test is geared for 1 hour. Most people can finish in that. But if they need the extra half hour, or even more, like 45 minutes right till the end of the break, that's almost double time, an hour and 45, 50 minutes as opposed to 1 hour. They get that. But if I was to give you guys all the way until the next day, that's not fair, because it's the same subjects, same requirements, same amount of slides for my in-person class. And of course, everyone has an open book option, but which I assume you're going to open notes, open book. You can just don't use your electronic devices. But how can I control that? That's something, it's an honor system on that one. With the in-person class, they can't use their cell phones or any other electronic device, but they can use their laptop for notes. And I just walk around the room, and the midterm went fine. So I'm trying to have a level playing field, and that's the only fair way to do it. I consulted with a couple other teachers that have done this since the pandemic and the shutdowns and the beginning of slowly returning to in-person classes, but have everyone. So you guys have until midnight. And the reason I'm giving you a longer than the other class, 3 or 4 hours more, is because some of you will want to convert from hand printed answers that you wrote right during the live exam in class, and then it's not being posted on YouTube. I'll remind everyone of this with a detailed email the week before the exam, and I'll send you the exam the night before it's due, which means by Sunday the 12th. The point is that you'll have a little extra time to convert if you need to a Word doc, or from a Word doc to PDF, or from hand printed notes. And of course, that gives you the chance to go back and correct your answers, change your answers if you feel the need to. But midnight, just like with the midterm, same thing. It will be the cutoff for submitting all the final exam PDFs, and you'll get detailed instructions reminding you of all these things. But now's a good time, as always, the beginning of any class, to ask questions about anything relating. Now, so far, I've gotten a few more people getting extra credit in the last week, since or last even 2 days, maybe 3 or 4, but nobody's come close to. Let me just double check. I said this, I think, last week last class on Monday, I meant, that the most anyone's got in this class, well, one student has 40 points. That's 2/3 of the max. And another has 30, but so far I don't have. Of course, I haven't checked my email today. I've been commuting and setting up for this class meeting with readers. So if you haven't sent any extra credit in, or you've only sent 10 points or 20, remember, you can go up to 60 points. That's well over 1 whole letter grade in addition to, or more than you would get. In other words, you could boost your grade to a higher grade if you think you might need it. And you can email me anytime for the grade, not during class, of course. I can't tell you, but confidentiality being the rule here. If you email me, I'll tell you what your total points are up to that point, up to that day. And that'll tell you how many more points you need to get the grade you want, and whether or not you might want to do extra credit. I will send a detailed, semi-detailed email. I think I'll wait till next week when it gets closer to the exam, and then resend that a second time, just as a reminder on final exams week. Okay, hang on, what have we got? I don't need to view, I want to admit them. There we go. Oh, yeah. Did you guys get, yeah, good, you got in, because usually it says admit in a blue, right, window, and I hit that, but it said view. Okay, thank you, welcome. We haven't started any of the slides. I'm just summarizing about the exam, but I won't repeat what I just said for the other people who were here before. And that is, don't forget the date. It's on your syllabus. It is Monday 13th. Then you're done. Once you finish the exam and turn it in, unless you choose to do extra credit after the exam, that I do give people an option, because it doesn't take me long to enter those points. And that cutoff will be the weekend. I think it's Saturday, when a final exams week officially ends by the college calendar. I will send you another email reminding you of that. One about the options before the final and one after the final. So in case somebody thinks, oh, maybe I didn't do so well on my final, or I know my point totals are a little lower than I was hoping, and I'm not sure I'm going to get the grade I want, you'll still have the option for, what is that, Monday through 5 more days after the final, to turn in extra credit up to 60 points total. Okay, any questions now about anything, about grading, extra credit? I'm surprised more people haven't done the movie option. So I think of that as one of the more interesting and easier, although you have to spend.
I do have a question.
Sure.
About the extra credit. It's supposed to be like how many museums and because I know that I cannot do the same for all the extra credits. So I was wondering if the movies, the museums, and what else?
Well, all you have to write is 2 pages about what you learned about that artist's life and their artwork from that movie or documentary. You can watch a documentary. The minimum requirements are 1 hour or more. I mean, most documentaries are at least an hour, right? I mean, a half-hour one wouldn't work, because it wouldn't give you enough information. So an hour or more for either, I mean, no feature films less than an hour. Most films, of course, are between 1 and 2 hours. You watch the movie, whatever you choose, take notes, or just remember what you thought about or learned about that artist, and then write 2 pages of your, there's no, corrections for spelling or no research needed. And send me as a PDF your short, that's like a 2-page essay, summary of what you learned about that artist. I've had like 3 people do that. That's all out of 30 people now in this class. So keep that in mind. That option is I think it's an interesting, different one. I just created it for the first time this semester. It just occurred to me to do that, or at the end of last semester, actually, because it's a good way to learn if a film is well made. I've already given you guys, remember I did this, I won't do it again, the 5, I think, best movies about the life of an artist in English language anyway. Actually, Frida, some of it's in Espanol, right? And of course, Salma Hayek is from Mexico, but it's mostly in English. And those scenes, in case that's an issue for anybody, where she speaks Spanish or some of her family members do, there's, of course, um, translations at the bottom. Okay, so yeah, is that clear that you're just writing 2 pages of your impressions of what that artist's life was like after you watch a movie about him? Any artist?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, good. Okay, anybody else?
Mark, a quick question on the photos of buildings. For that extra credit, we need to send you 4 photos of one building. Correct?
That's the normal requirement. The one exception is the Julia Morgan homes in Petaluma, and I have been so busy responding to that set of so-called requirements that don't really make sense. Boy, I could get in trouble even saying that. In any case, what I was just telling you, I had to deal with that. Plus, we all have to do. See, we do classes too. They're online and they're required, which is a good thing. So I was too busy to send you guys or even create. But I will, if someone will email me a PDF with the addresses and the name of the house and even the year of the 4 Julia Morgans. You can take 1 photo of each in Petaluma. And that's the exception. Whereas 1 photo of the exterior of 4 houses qualifies as 4 photos in 1 PDF. That's worth 10 points. They're all within about a mile of each other. I think someone in this class was telling me they had trouble finding them. But
can we do multiple photos of one building?
That's the main requirement. Yeah, good point.
Oh, okay. That's
so
it's just 4 photos, nothing else.
Yeah. 4 different views, not 4 of the same exact.
Yeah, obviously.
You know what I mean? Different angles or details would be good. So pick a building with some interesting features. You don't have to go inside. Now, if you can go inside, then it's 3 photos interior and 1 of the exterior. But I'm not going to get picky about that. As long as they're different images, 4 of the same site, building or structure. Again, it could be don't go on the Golden Gate Bridge with a camera in your hand. I don't think that's a good idea. I've had students submit photos. I don't know how they did that, but they weren't, I hope, standing on the bridge while they took them. It's not that safe this time of year. Actually, the weather's so good. Who knows? Anyway, you can also go to the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco. Oh, there's so many ways to take pictures around that lagoon, in the Marina District, Maybeck's most famous building, or whatever, any site where you can get 4 different views of the same building from the outside, or go inside and do 3 interiors and 1 exterior. That's the requirement, and that's worth 10 points. And you can do that twice. Color PDFs with identify. Don't forget where the building is, the name, and your name. Class. Okay, that's.
Yep. Thank you.
10 points. You're welcome. Of course. Anybody else with any other questions about? Okay, so we were about to take a trip to, I think a couple of you, I know already asked, to the Central Coast. It is almost exactly halfway, and it's not an accident that William Randolph Hearst, most historians place him as the 3rd wealthiest man in America at the time, after John D. Rockefeller, and I forget who was second. I don't know, Carnegie was dead by then. Anyway, did all the libraries, but there were a few handful of wealthier men. And he certainly was in the top 10 and one of the first billionaires. But the main thing is William Randolph Hearst was the first media mogul. And when he built Hearst Castle, and you're going to see the evidence of this in just a moment with the detailed slides, we're going to go through some of the major rooms inside that site. It's not one building, it's several buildings. He was trying to appeal to both Northern and Southern California, people who were in the upper echelon of their media. That would be journalists. Ludwig Bemelmans, 1 or 2 of you might know he was. Anybody read Madeline, the children's book series? Madeline, the little girl who was, an orphan in Paris. And said poo poo to the lion in the zoo. I know it. Those books are still for sale, and I know from my daughter's at least a few years ago. That author, he was friends with him. Every famous actor you ever heard of from in that period. We're talking about the 30s, 40s. That roughly 20 years, when he opened his house to his invited guests, and they had nonstop parties at the house. You'll see the first sight of one of the pools. There were 2 pools. You'll see both indoor and outdoor, and then also movie producers, writers. Well, I already mentioned the children's book writer, but all the other famous ones, and even some up and coming actors. So they were all in this instant. Let's let that person in. Good timing. Okay, we're just about to start the first slide of the Hearst Castle, and we get to go through those buildings. He was trying to appeal to them both because it was a pleasure palace. That's what it was called in the media. Hearst Pleasure Palace, host. They didn't say orgies, though that's too strong a word, not like Roman orgies, but things happened that weren't technically, typical for most people because of the setting and because of his wealth and his power. But nobody ever accused anybody of abusing anyone there. At least that's not what I've read a lot about Hearst Castle, and I know people who worked on it, or I knew people who actually went to those parties. When I wrote my book on Julia Morgan, I interviewed people who had been there, and they said, no, it wasn't about. We're not talking about Epstein or some sicko like that. We're talking about someone who just enjoyed, throwing big parties and, of course, having people do what the consenting adults chose to do. So let us go now to see the evidence of what the setting was like for some of these gala events. And let's get rid of this and move that up and get this full screen. You guys can see this?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so this is the Neptune pool, it was called, which is much like supposedly outdoor pools, and I've been all over Italy, so I can tell you what is left. There are mostly in ruins, but there's some that have been partially restored as historic sites, old Roman pools, outdoors, because as you know, some of Italy has, well, in northern Italy, but most of Italy, south of from Rome south, would have warm enough climate that even in the winter, sometimes you could have outdoor, events around your pools. And if you're very wealthy, especially if you're the emperor, you're going to have an outdoor pool on your villa. So that's what this is. It's Julia Morgan's design for that Hearst asked her to create for a pool that would evoke ancient Roman pools, outdoor pools. And so what you see here, if you look at this, is a number of things that are obviously of Roman. Here, I'm not going to get too much detail, and no notes are required. These would be probably Roman upper class women, or they could be goddesses. There's plenty of goddesses. Remember, the Greeks and the Romans had this, you may know from taking ancient art history or just reading about that period of history, that the Greeks and the Romans had the same exact set of gods, say that last 5 times. And so that could be Diana the Huntress, it's hard to say. Anyway, what we have here, though, is the most remarkable feat of engineering of any pool I've ever heard of, and it wouldn't be obvious. Let's go see another view of it. We've got several views. This part was imported. I'm going to say what's so remarkable about the engineering in a minute, but look at this is an actual Roman ruin from the 4th century AD, which would be the period after Rome became a Christian empire, right? Officially, you don't have to know any of this unless you take art 1.1 or 2.1, and I am teaching those courses in the next semester or so. This was taken piece by piece on a boat, and then I assume a train, and reassembled here under the management of Julia Morgan and her crew. She had 100 workers working under her for this, and she worked on it for over 22 years. They kept building, or Hearst would ask her to design and then build new buildings. That's why we say it's not one structure, Hearst Castle. That's misleading. It's a complex or compound of buildings. But this was the portico, right? Column, porch, or entrance to a Roman temple, which had been converted to a Christian church by the time, this, building was open. That's around the time that Rome, in the 300s AD, became a quote, unquote, Christian empire. And so I guess Hearst, thinking that was he was Catholic, he was a devout Catholic, despite his lifestyle. And he chose to have it imported. He saw it in Europe and had it, bought it legally, with, the proper permits, because it was going to be sold somewhere in, I think it was Italy. And it was brought here and re-erected as like a Roman ruin. But here is a nice view of the pool. That pool floor, this is an Olympic-sized pool. No, this isn't it. The indoor one is. Sorry, this isn't Olympic-sized. The indoor pool, you'll see in a minute or two. So what's engineering, a major engineering feat about it is the following. By the way, I want to give credit to guys to do real quick. This set of photos, the whole rest of what you can see today, All the exterior and interior photos were taken by a person I work with on all three of my books, Joel Pugliotti, whose name is on the cover of those books. And he's just a superb photographer. Okay, so what do we see here? We see the floor of the pool is blue tile. That's just traditional Roman style decorations. What's unusual is the pool is floating. The pool floor or bottom, or we want to say the whole structure of the pool, the basin, that's the right word, is floating on springs. And why would you do that? Because they have earthquakes there, very frequent earthquakes. I think I said, yeah, I did on Monday. She was trained first as an engineer at UC Berkeley, got a whole degree in it, an undergraduate degree, but you couldn't do much with that when you were a woman, and all you have is a BA in engineering. So that's when Maybeck, remember, encouraged her to go to Paris to the #1 architecture school in the world and get her master's, where she could practice architecture, and became the first woman with her own licensed independent office. So when she designed this pool, she knew about the earthquake. Of course, as well after the 1906 quake, and they had them in that area. She knew that. So it has survived with, if you're in the pool during one of their 5 point so quakes, they get them that often, occasionally even 6, have hit this hillside here. It's in San Luis Obispo County. So what happens? The pool, the water sloshes a little on either side, but no cracks, no damage, no loss of water, no tsunami, mini tsunami. It's so well designed that it can ride out most of the kinds of quakes, even the bigger ones we have in California. It was designed with that in mind, as well as the luxury of people sitting around. By the way, the movie Spartacus, some of you may have heard of, one of the first epic movies from Hollywood. Well, not one of the first, but one of the most famous. 1960s, not that far back, with Kirk Douglas as the slave who rebelled, almost overthrew the Roman Empire, named Spartacus. They filmed several scenes of a Roman ruling class lounging around this pool. They used this pool for that movie and many other movies, including some TV series that were set in ancient Rome. Okay, so here's the view of it from above. And there's that portico, authentic Rome portico. Everything else is about 1922 or so, early 20s. Now we're going to go inside. We'll see the other pool in a few minutes. The guest houses. There were 3 of them. Get this, cottages, he called, that's what Hearst called them. They were 4,500 to 5,000 square feet each, with multiple bedrooms, luxury bathrooms, and even a place if you brought your own, servant, paid. Of course, we're not talking about any kind of indentured servants with you, your maid or whatever, your hairdresser. Some of these people from Hollywood, of course, traveled like that. There'd be room for them, and they all had luxurious quarters. Even the servants' quarters were, because that's how Gina Morgan was. She didn't believe people should be treated differently if they came from a different socioeconomic background than the wealthier clients she had. Obviously, hers was the wealthiest client she ever had. So look at this. Let's get a close up here. Yes, that's gold. Anybody been to Versailles outside Paris? Anybody? No.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I thought one of you said. So it should look a little similar to that. At least.
Yeah, the Hall of Mirrors along the top, I think,
Yeah.
and there are other areas as well.
Yeah.
Quite amazing.
Yeah, well, they have I think this is plaster and gilded. It might be just be gold paint, but that's still real gold in the paint. I can't remember that much detail, but what I do remember is everything above here. This is called, the paneling, of course, obviously, but some people would call those coffers, recessed panels here, which are then carved. That's wood, plaster carved and then painted. Look how many colors. And here's a crest that I don't know where it came from. It could be, I doubt it's the Hearst family. They're not royal. They weren't royalty. They just got rich overnight when his mother was given a deed. You know the story? Anybody? No, probably nobody's seen Citizen Kane. They portrayed this house in that movie or this complex, but they used a place in Florida. They didn't get permission to film here because somehow Hearst was suspicious. And yes, that movie makes fun of him and his second wife. Well, she was his common law wife, the actress Marion Davies. It's a great movie, but it's black and white, so most people probably don't watch a movie like that today. Citizen Kane, it's about Hearst, and even though they don't use any real names, everyone knew that. So they were trying to show how he felt like he should have treated the same as royalty. And he did have that big an ego. So let's back up again and see how everything in this whole complex, including the fireplace screen itself, look how ornate that is. Some of it's imported. The furniture was purchased at various, or in Europe, some of it, and other places like San Francisco antique shops, from the periods that he was trying to evoke, which was the highlight of when Versailles, or the high point of the French monarchy, which is when Versailles was created. The late 1600s through the late 1700s, about the 100 years prior to the French Revolution, before everything, all the royal family members suffered one way or another, as of course was the social justice of those days. So he was trying to evoke Hearst, how their lifestyle was in 20th century America. Here's another one. I love this ceiling. If you go up close, you can see how ornate. These are Islamic motifs. And those are an influence, according to all the research I did. And also, there's letters between Hearst and her. Even when she would come down every weekend, she took the train from her office in San Francisco. And she'd take off time occasionally for vacation or to travel, but she wasn't married, had no children. So she would spend whatever time she had after the normal work week, several months out of the year, designing parts or supervising the construction of structures and interior detailing and all the pools and things here. And sometimes she'd work 18 hours a day. She easily worked an average of 10 to 12 hours almost every day. Anyway, so she would sometimes get up on a ladder to check her workman's work to make sure it was done properly. And she had a love of Islamic and Asian art and architecture long before that was a common theme, except for movie theaters. Then, yeah, you'd see that in a Fantasia, but she tried to get more accurate imagery from other world cultures. And so why would that be here on a house that's evoking 17th century French architecture, or at least the interiors of these guest houses? Because she and Hearst consult on this, because some of it has Spanish overview. In fact, the Casa Grande itself is a style of a late Renaissance, you say 1600 vintage, churches in southern Spain, which was, after all, some of you know this, the Moors, the North African Muslim culture that conquered Spain and occupied for hundreds of years before they were kicked out by the Christian king and queen, right? That period, that's hundreds of years. That left an influence on Spanish architecture from the Renaissance on. And you see that if you go to Mexico, as well as any Latin American country, and of course in Spain. So look at this painting now. Let's see, I think that's an authentic Italian Renaissance painting by someone who's probably in textbooks. It's not a Da Vinci, but he didn't own any of those, but he owned some very valuable paintings. I love this view because the light was coming through just the right time of day. Joel really worked hard to get this exact, detailing. And to see what these are figures from 17th century churches, either in Spain or possibly Mexico or France, one of the Latin-speaking countries. So the theme has that much of a common thread to it. That we're talking about Catholic, and he was, I told you, Hearst himself, and his 5 sons he had with his first wife was a devout, observant Catholic. So you see a lot of the influence of the late Renaissance architectural details from those kinds of countries: Spain, Italy, France, and Mexico are the main ones. And then over here, this is an interesting detail. That's a bas-relief, which is also probably authentic Renaissance. Now that would be a Julia Morgan creation, the fireplace, of course. Most of those fireplaces were not brought, but the ones in the bigger rooms in the main house, you're going to see in the next few minutes, were. Here's the cover of my book. This shot, I remember I saw it when Joel was setting up his lighting. It takes a long time. He's a one-man wonder. He can do all this heavy lifting with these lights and things that require lugging back and forth from his vehicle. I don't even know how he does it, but anyway, I stood at the end of this pool, and this is the so-called Roman pool, and it's the type of pool that Romans would have had inside their bathhouses. At least that's what our evidence shows. But these light fixtures are, obviously early 20th century. But everything else, the tile work, was made in Italy, handmade and imported and shipped here. And she supervised every detail. She just obviously lived, ate, and breathed architecture. Was her passion. Even on the ceilings here, the inlay here, all of that is handmade craftsmanship created detailing. So this pool is an Olympic size pool, and these are, I believe, authentic. There are some, if not these two, I'm pretty sure at least one or both of them are imported from Italy, actual ancient sculptures of life-size figures. And then we have, I think, a couple other views. Let's take a look. Isn't that magnificent? Yeah. Yeah. So after we both agreed that last shot would be the cover shot for the book, it has been for all, what is it, 4 now editions that my Judah Martin book's been printed in. No need to change that cover, but this could have been a close second. We thought about this. I just like it, but this here, this isn't really a period thing. This is Art Deco. Some of you know what that means. These look like, New York skyscrapers from the 1930s. Or Chicago for that matter, from the period between the early 20s and late 40s. It's a style called Art Deco, and we didn't cover it in this class because it's more for the Art 2.3 modern art class. But look at that tile. The company that makes it is still in business, and it's gotten so expensive that a lot of places, even wealthy clients, don't want to spend the amount of money it costs to import the kind of tile that this was made out of. I mean, like look at these details up here, right? Sea nymphs, I guess they are features. And then there is some gold here. It's mostly, just paint over the tile itself, but it's really a beautiful space. This is on the main tour. I think the one person who said they've been there, right? I believe. Did you get to see both pools? I think you said you did, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so the guide explains some of these things to you. Okay, because it's, a lot of the tour guides there, about half of them know everything they should know. And then there's about that many. I've been there about 4 times with different people, maybe 5 over the years, including 2 from other countries that had heard of Hearst Castle, one of them from Russia and the other from France. That they don't, some of the docents don't even know or if they know who Julia Morgan was, they don't talk about her more than just maybe briefly. So if you don't mind me asking before we move on to the next set of slides, really quickly, do you remember if the tour guide you took the tour from did emphasize Julia Morgan's role in creating all of these wonderful spaces?
Mark, I don't recall, and I should have taken your class first.
Yeah, okay. Well, because I was hired by the docents organization. There's another view of that. Now, these are authentic Roman, what would you call the handles? Well, they're actually, these are volutes. They would have been at the top of a temple. It's called the cornice line. I'll go back. You know what? It can't hurt because we're not in a hurry here. And we'll still end early. We're not going to go to. Yeah. Yes, I did. That's a cornice line. So some Roman temples, right below the pediment where there's statues of Greek, usually Greek/Roman, they're the same Greco-Roman gods. Okay, why do I mention that? Because this would be more appropriate for that part of the top of the wall, just below the roof line, called the cornice line on a Roman temple. So somehow Hearst decided they made nice handles to get yourself into the pool. And I'm sure there's a ladder under the water there. Steps, I should say, not a ladder. Okay, but he wanted my photographer to capture the way the sun reflects off the walls. Now we're going inside Casa Grande, and these are probably, to me, I love the pools, but I think that the interior of the main house, Casa Grande, that is going to be, you've already got enough notes, you don't need to add anymore, unless you haven't seen that lecture at all, you might want to mention. This is the largest, or if you want to add this to, if you didn't get those notes before, it was the largest private compound, as in residential, I should say, private residential compound on the West Coast for decades. It's been supplanted or replaced by, I believe it's Bill Gates' place, but no one ever shows photos of that because it's a concrete bunker like. So that's up near Seattle, right? So it's now, I think, the second largest residential compound on the West Coast. It has 55,000 square feet, over 60 rooms, and multiple dining rooms, libraries, and we would call them living rooms or sitting rooms. And it has one of the largest, it was at least then, I'm pretty sure it still is one of the largest wine cellars on the West Coast. So we're going to see several of the rooms. This is one of the sitting rooms. We today would call that a living room. And this is an authentic historic structure, which by looking at it, I can tell because it's early Baroque, probably right around 1600 from a chateau somewhere in probably France or maybe Italy, because they liked reviving the classical imagery from ancient Greece and Rome, but they got more ornate, like you can see around the middle and up here. It's a massive fireplace. It's a walk-in, you know the phrase walk-in closet, walk-in fireplace. When I was a realtor, I never used those terms because unless I'm 6 feet tall, if I couldn't walk into it, it ain't a walk-in. And you could get sued for that stuff when you were advertising property if you falsely advertise it. After the person bought the property, they could come back and claim that you misled them, say so. You don't want to do that. So this, I can tell you, at least when I was there, you could just about walk into it. It's that big, and then some of the other fireplaces are too. Okay, so let's back up and see the room overall. That ceiling, I'm not quite sure if it was created by Julia Morgan, an imitation of or a replica, recreation is the right word, of a probably early Renaissance, that'd be 1500s, either French or Spanish Renaissance ceiling. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. But these panels here, these are something that it would have been bought in Europe probably by one of Hearst agents. You know, Julie Morgan did a lot of that purchasing for her. She loved doing that. When she'd take time off from supervising this and she had a vacation planned, he'd say, oh, you're going to go to Italy, you're going to go to France, whatever. Can you see if you can pick me up X, Y, or Z for the next part of Hearst Castle project? And she would almost always find something and he would always have her incorporate it. Here's the grand dining hall. This is where a number of movies, I think Robin Hood with Kevin Costner, was that? I can't remember anyway. A couple other movies set during the Middle Ages have used this room to evoke the grandeur of the ruling classes. Obviously, not most people's lives were miserable in the Middle Ages. And this ceiling is an authentic 14th century ceiling. That would be Gothic era. It isn't Renaissance, it's pre-Renaissance, late medieval. And this table can seat, I think it's 30, or is it 3 dozen people, something in that ballpark at one time. And they've often had that many people gathered around it. And then we see the flags of different provinces in Europe, because this far back, the 1300s, there weren't any real countries. There were the beginnings of France and England, but there was no, most of the rest of Europe was just a bunch of warring, you know, within what's now a country. There was no country. There'd be just different kingdoms warring against each other, depending on which warlord had the best army or the best generals. The one might dominate, but there weren't, you know, national borders like we think of today, except part of what's now France was already, and England. And then Spain later. But this is a period of course, there was the Black Plague. It wasn't a pleasant time to be alive. There was the 100 Years' War between France and England, and we know how the peasants lived. But the rich, what was that movie Mel Brooks made? God, he's almost 100 and he's still alive. When he made some film, The History of the World, it's good to be king. In other words, yes, if you were at the top of the course, then things were much better. And that's how Hearst wanted to see his own space that he was creating, that he had worked his way up. No, he hadn't. He inherited that wealth from his mother, but then he actually did increase it. So in the movie, by the way, if anybody ever sees that movie, I'll give you credit for that one if you watch it. It's a film on exactly 2 hours. It's always rated as one of the 100 best American films of all time. I know it's 1940, it's black and white. It's called Citizen Kane, Kane. Orson Welles in that movie should have gotten the Academy Award for portraying the same kind of ego man who had, you know, as Hearst. That's what he was doing. It was obvious to everyone who saw the movie and all the critics that it was. And Hearst tried to sue him to prevent the movie from being released. Talk about censorship. Literally before the fact, he tried to sue some of the other movie theaters. The ones he owned wouldn't show it, but he didn't own all the movie theaters in America. And so that's how controversial it was. And it does kind of overstate things. For instance, his second wife was not a talentless alcoholic hack. She was a competent actress, actually. Kirsten Dunst played her in some movie about Hearst. I can't remember the name of that one. But the movie I'm talking about does have, it's not this place, but it does talk about the collecting of the art and the construction of this mammoth, you know, palace-like place, which of course is, remember, not just one building. Okay, so let's move on to, there's the ceiling looking straight up. Yeah, these are authentic, what now living at 700 or nearly 700-year-old hand-carved wooden panels. Again, disassembled from somewhere where it was done. He did follow the local rules and laws in each country. He didn't have anything taken out illegally, as often happens in other, or even in Europe occasionally it happens, but other parts of the world, which is of course wrong. Oh. Hang on, folks. I thought I plugged it in. Yep, there we go. We're all right. Yeah, I had distractions because I met with one of my readers. Both she and I were running late. We're okay. It was just the plug wasn't all the way. My apologies. Okay, here's the billiard room. Ever been to a billiard room like this? This is another probably 14th century. I think that's right. I remember some of these details. It has been, let me do the math, 14 years since I worked on this book with the two photographers. The other one is Monica Lee. She took the exterior photos of Hearst Castle, the ones I started with. I should have said that before. Monica Lee, she doesn't do photography anymore, but Joe Pugliotti does still. Okay, this is a hunting scene, obviously, and this is definitely French. I remember that very well, and he loved that. I don't think he ever hunted, but you know, the idea, right? Okay, that he could perhaps join a hunting scene. And then here we have the kind of decorative tile work that Julia Morgan was really good at creating, which recreates the period that he evokes. See, each room might have a different century to it. So that's where some people get the idea that either the architect, i.e. Julia Morgan, or Hearst, her client, or both, didn't know anything about historical accuracy, or that they were creating a hodgepodge of styles. No, the exterior of the building is consistent with early 17th, Main, circa 1600s, right? That would be the Baroque era, it's called. Architecture in Spain, very specific, and also in Mexico. There are plenty of churches in Mexico that old, as many of you may know from either living there or traveling there. So the oldest, European built structures in this hemisphere are in either Cuba or Mexico, the two first colonies that Spain established, as you may know, in the early 1500s. So she could have traveled, which she did, all around the world, including to Mexico sometimes, to find the inspiration for some of these newer recreations. Then she would have her craftsmen maybe contribute. She'd always hire the best people. I think I told you this before, that she wasn't adverse to hiring people that were, quote, illegal, unquote, and protecting them against whatever. They didn't have ICE back then, but whatever that people that inspected your credentials if you were an immigrant and hadn't applied for citizenship yet. The people from China, from other parts of Asia, from Latin America, and even some European countries who might not have had their, quote, green card. If they were talented, she gave them, what's the word, safe haven, and she paid them, not lower wages like some contractors or architects would have done. Again, many reasons to admire her, because she definitely was ahead of her time. So let's go now see. Here's one of the two libraries. This is the one I like least because it's a bit too busy, I think, the ceiling. Look at that ceiling. It's almost overwhelming, isn't it? These are recessed wooden, almost, they look like half of a honeycomb or something, or of course they are. Is it hexagonal? I got a cow. No, octagonal. Yeah, that's from an old building in probably Baroque, circa 1600. Can you tell that the ceiling was cut in half? Can people see that? And it had to be put up in two sections because it was taken apart in Europe where it was purchased and brought here. And this is a new fireplace that Julia Morgan would have designed. And then yet all these pieces here, I mean, most people's yearly salary would barely be enough to buy. These are ancient Greek vases, the ones that are here in the corner. And then the books were worth quite a bit. He bequeathed the whole, Hearst did, when he died in 1951, I think it was, the entire estate to the state of California, or the people of California, and they decided to open it within a year to the public, as it is still an historic site slash museum, which is what it is. This is his mother's bedroom. But she had died. So some people think it's a little, maybe, I don't know if you want to say morbid, that he had a bedroom which he dedicated to the memory, because he started this project just as she was getting ill with the Spanish influenza, the Spanish flu, they called it, which really didn't start in Spain. They killed 75 million people worldwide. Some historians say 50. It was tens of millions, more than this has. This is what, 5 million now have died. It'll probably go over 10 million, God forbid, in the next couple of years. But that one was a 2-year, and she was one of the last. I told you this. Some of you heard on Monday. People in America to die from that. His mother. And it was just as the project was getting, he had just hired Julie Morgan. She'd done the blueprints, and maybe the groundbreaking had happened. So he never, I guess, totally forgot about the fact that he was going to have a room for her. So he, of course, he left this room empty part of the time, and other times some of his most, favored guests would get to use it. And so you can see it's got, arches, Roman arches, rounded arches, and then that's gold inlay on the door. And then the ceiling is, again, assembled from historic properties. But here's the other part of that room. Look at that. Painting on the ceiling alone is a museum piece. See if we can get closer. Yeah, see the painting. I can't remember what it's, but it's also probably, it looks French. French 17th century or so, based on the style. And then this fireplace, probably, yes, it was imported. But these things, these called Della Robbias, they're from Italy, and they are still being made 600 years after the family, they're called the Della Robbia family in Florence, started creating these bas-relief ceramics panels, which are used all over the world, but it's mostly in well-to-do people and or private institutions. But Julie Morgan liked them so much that she used them in some of her public buildings and a few of her smaller residences. Yes, please go ahead.
I do have a question. Is there any design behind the curtain?
Behind the whole thing?
The curtains on the walls, the walls that has a design.
Are you talking about this? I can't quite, it's hard to hear because, your microphone, I think is somehow muffling some of what you're saying. So say it again. You're asking about the design of which? Of the ceiling?
The wall behind the curtains. It has
Oh, is there anything behind the curtain? I don't know. Hey, it's a good question. They didn't lift the, the covering there. It's been that way since he had Julia Morgan finish the design, but I'm sure that looks so new. He's probably had this, the state of California would have had it replaced since it's been 1958. My goodness, how many years is that? Over 60 years that it's been open to the public. So I don't know, I'm probably plain wood. That would make sense. Otherwise, why would you cover it up, right? It's interesting. No one's ever asked that before. So it's a mixture of Julia Morgan's original designs, things that she purchased for Hearst, and then some things that were brought intact, shipped in pieces and reassembled here from Europe after either Hearst himself or someone working for him saw them. This is my favorite library. I like this one a lot. This is the Gothic Library, they call it. And you can see why if you're ever taking art history that covers the period before the Renaissance, that's the Gothic era, late medieval, like Gothic cathedrals, right, in Europe. And these Gothic arches, these are done by local painters, probably some of them from Europe that she had hired already doing other projects for other clients and knew they were very talented. You're going to see the evidence of some of that. And Walt Disney artwork. I'm not kidding. In the next site, we'll end up with this selection today. So these paintings are meant to evoke the kind of detail you might see on some authentic Gothic, meaning 1400s, but from around 12, little after 1200 in Europe, in France, when the style started, all the way up to the Renaissance. So it's well like 300 years when this style was called Gothic, with the pointed arches and the tall, narrow church towers, or tapering, they call them, or at least with spires on top of the towers that point towards heaven. And then this kind of thing here, that kind of decorative detail, and lots of stained glass windows. Well, here the windows aren't stained glass. He didn't want dark interior because he actually used this library a lot. So the fireplace, probably Julie Morgan, but she could have purchased. But this is very likely, in fact, they know it was imported from a French Gothic chateau or possibly a church. And then these are his books, of course, carefully protected behind these walls. And the furniture is all authentic period stuff. I don't think any of the tour, at least when I was there, this is 2006 now, so I don't remember being told that any of it was replicas or reproductions. The period pieces of the chairs, at least some of them evoke the period, maybe a couple of them are, of the period of the rooms they're in. And so these would be of the style that some obviously wealthy nobles and you know, nobility families that were in the ruling classes would have had around their tables. And there we go. Oh, I stand corrected. This is the room that he did design for her, but he decided, I forgot, it's been a while since I've shown these slides, but I forgot that this room became more of one of the premier guest rooms that his favorite guests could stay at. So he decided not to use it as a memorial to her, but this one is. There she is. There's a portrait painting of her, one of the last paintings done of her. She was obviously, probably around 60 or so. I think she died 1919 or early 1920. And he began the project in 1919. So this is her bedroom. And this room also, he would allow other people to stay because he didn't want unused, but it often sat empty. And these are, this is probably obvious, these are not authentic medieval, at least the last time I checked, paintings or inlaid panels. They are recreated from that period. But the ceiling itself, probably, oh yeah, it is, with that kind of from the era we're talking about, the Gothic or late medieval period. The four-poster bed, I don't think she ever got to use. Oh, I know she didn't, because this room wasn't finished before she died. I think it's called the Phoebe Hearst room, or at least it's dedicated to her. But this was my favorite bedroom. This is the celestial room, they called it. It's in the tower. I'm going to do this real quick, because if I don't, it won't make sense. It's this. See these here? The bedrooms are these rooms right there. Each tower has a celestial bedroom, and only his very favorite guests got to stay in. And I asked we got a tour guided by the director of the whole site, not just the normal docent. And he, of course, knew all of his history and was very happy in his job. It was really nice to have him as our guide. And of course, he had to then tell people, no tours admitted in this room while the photography is happening. And some tourists would pass by the door and look past the velvet ropes, to keep them out. Oh, come we don't get to go in that room? Well, someone's photographing it. Sorry. Anyway, so what we got to find out was this room was always requested by two people. Ludwig Bemelmans, who was the author of those children's books. A couple of you must have heard of them or even read them or had your parents read them to you when you were kids, right? At least around the beginning of grade school age when I heard them read. Madeline series of books about a group of orphan children who were taken care of by nuns living in Paris. And they go all over northern France, not just Paris, in different sequences. That was a very popular series. And they even made some TV show and I think one live action show and a bunch of cartoon versions of that. Ludwig Bemelmans, he was French, but he spoke English. He would come here and this was his favorite room. And the other one, Charlie Chaplin, and whichever woman he was with at the time. That's how he put, because he was known to be a little libertine, is the phrase, right? With various, often some of the women working with him on his movies or otherwise, just that he knew through his career as one of the top actors in the history of film, of course, really the greatest comedic actor maybe of all time. He would request this room and he would, of course, have it. And if someone else had temporarily been told they might get it, right, and but they hadn't arrived yet, they would be booted out if either of those two, they were two of Hearst's favorite guests. And it was meant for, privacy and of course, couples to enjoy. And the view's spectacular out over the ocean, all the way down this hill. It's, by the way, the altitude here is 1,800 feet above sea level. And when you look down the hill, the rolling hills heading toward the water, which isn't that far away, maybe a mile inland from the actual top of the hill where this Casa Grande building stands. The peak of that hill, La Cuesta Encantada, remember in Spanish means the enchanted hill. He chose it because you could see on a clear day, tens of miles, I don't know, dozens of miles in each direction up and down the coast, and it's mostly unspoiled except for the little town nearby. And my mind is blanking on that little town that's the nearest. San Simeon, yeah, San Simeon. It's often called San Simeon, but that is really just locating it. That's the nearest town. I think that's like 5 miles, 10 miles away. Okay, now we're going to look at 2 more sites. This is a DC campus. It's an extra credit option for anyone who wants to go to Berkeley. It's the, you can see Hearst Gymnasium for Women, named for his William Randolph Hearst mother, who had, as I said, died at the end of the influenza epidemic. Actually, it was in like November 1919. It ended sometime in early 20s, so that's why I say she's one of the last victims of it. This is now coeducational, but at the time it was only for women because women weren't yet allowed to participate in sports with men at any level, even just for PE classes or whatever physical education courses. They had to have their own separate facilities, but a protected, quote unquote, is at least the phrase that would have been used then. In 1924, this was a joint project, both architects equally involved. Julia Morgan and Maybeck worked together on this. So we had the mentor or master and the former student, which by this time she was really well known and respected as a very successful architect. And so the 2 of them, no one knows which parts either one designed. I mean, most people assume Julia Morgan did the interiors and the exteriors were by Maybeck. We don't know. But one thing we can say, see these giant urns here? They're 8 feet from the base to the top. They're very similar to the ones around the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco that Maybeck had already designed, because of course that was for the 1915 World's Fair. Okay, so let's go inside the building. It is basically Beaux-Arts. That's the style taught at the college both of them went to. Maybeck went there in the 1880s and Julia Morgan in the early 1900s after they finally admitted her. I already told you that story, as the first woman ever to get a degree. These are old slides. They're from when we were working on the book. Monica Lee actually took these. And this would be about 14, 15. So it's deteriorated badly, and it's a shame, if not a crime, that the university doesn't pay to restore them. I don't know why, because they have the money to do it. And concrete does deteriorate at just about 100 years now. And this is a world-class landmark. It's a national and state historic landmark as well. It deserves to be. So let's go inside. There's an Olympic-sized pool. Okay, some of the Olympic swimmers that have been on the U.S. team, I can't remember the name. Some of you might know. In the last 3 or 4 Summer Olympics, were from UC Berkeley swim team and trained here. So they're very proud of that fact, but I can't remember the names of any of them. It's been a while since I've watched Olympics on TV. Okay, and then we have, this is classic Beaux-Arts. Beaux-Arts means beautiful arts, but what it means is Renaissance revival architecture. The style, the period we were talking about that Hearst Castle was inspired by, but here it is in a more dignified or less ornate, less busy version. Except for these wonderful cenotaphs, that's what they're called. They're almost like sarcophagi, like someone's body was buried or interred inside them. That's not what they're for. They're for decorative, symbolic purposes. So what do they symbolize? Let's see, I think I have another video. These were definitely done by Julia Morgan's preferred sculptor. See, here we have a close-up. This is when it was only women that could use this facility. This is to symbolize women united, right? In advancing women's rights. That's what this is about. That women were finally able to have their own facility and they could start competing in teams that, other colleges were beginning to have women's sports teams, even though at that point they almost all were kept separate. But, with basketball, WNBA, NBA, similar to that. And they were beginning to get some respect. And these are ancient, of course, Greek figures of Greek women who are carrying a garland, which is a symbol of unity, on their shoulders, one woman to the next, then they're looking at each other. You notice that? I love this piece of sculpture. It's so much of a high relief that it's almost not a type of bas relief. They're not freestanding, but they're not obviously just barely off the background. So she hired a German immigrant sculptor to design all the sculpture in this facility. And here's a little female cherub. Cherubs usually assumed to be male. Baby angels, Renaissance paintings use them a lot. Michelangelo and Da Vinci did occasionally, well, mostly Michelangelo. And that's a female clutching a football back when they were, pigskin, they call them, much thicker and heavier, right, than the modern football. So they were beginning to allow women to play football in women's sports teams by the 20s. Now, the last site is Wintune. There is Hearst again, and there's his second wife. Well, they were common law because his wife was Catholic also. She wouldn't grant him a legal divorce, but under California law, it was considered that he legitimately they were a married couple in that sense of the word. They were together decades. She was an actress, and unlike the movie Citizen Kane, she had talent. I think I mentioned earlier. And so they stayed together the rest of both of their lives. I think she was a good 20 years younger than him, but she was well over 25 or so when he met her. And so this is them at a place called, I actually showed you, if you remember on Monday, if you were there at that lecture, a place he had built near the border of Oregon, just south of the Oregon border on, I can't remember the name of the river, Cloud, I think it is river, very high up into the Sierras, but not way up, like about 3,500 feet above sea level. And so he after that building burned, the one that Maybeck had designed with some input from Julia Morgan, he hired Julia Morgan and Maybeck to design several new buildings. This would be in the 30s. And then she ended up taking the lead in that, and he only ended up contributing some details or a little advice, some consulting. I think he appeared on the sites a couple of times, but this is just one of those remarkable projects that the public will never see. Here's the work crew. And supposedly, again, because of Julie Morgan, well, maybe Hearst wouldn't have done anything differently. But when she hired people, she insisted they be paid a living wage. I think that's a phrase that I've heard associated with her. Well, that wasn't, it was during the Depression, remember, people were desperate for work. So they were paid better than many, and they were enough to actually support their families. And here are some of the buildings that she designed. This is the Bavarian Village, they call it, which is supposed to look like, of course, again, we're talking about the Gothic period, late medieval towns in southern Germany, right, which is where Bavaria is, with a half timbering and oh, I forgot. Yeah, we only had, is that the only view we have? Yeah, well, we're going to end up at Principia. Okay, Principia is the only place outside California that we had an original set of photos for. It's on the Mississippi River on the Missouri side. No, Illinois. What am I saying? Oh, I'm from Illinois. The Illinois side across the river from St. Louis. And most people have never heard of it. It's a private college. It's a Christian Science college, but it's open to people. It has a very high reputation as private, but of course it's very expensive. And they have preserved all of Maybeck. See, here's the map of it. He created an entire community here, and Julia Morgan did collaborate with him here. She didn't actually design any single building, but she did a lot of the detail. They're called finishing drawings, she and or her staff in her studio, and then would come down to consult with Maybeck, a couple times a year. This is a multi-year project. You'll see why. We're going to finish up with these. Lovely fall color. These are all photos by Joel. These ones, even though Monica Lee was doing all the exteriors for our book on Julia Morgan, she wasn't available for this project, so he did all the photos for the book on Maybeck. This is the church. Have you ever been to New England? Some of you have seen movies and photos and whatever about how New England, old villages in New England look, where they're 300-400-year-old buildings. This would look like a colonial era church, from the late 1700s. That's what it's meant to look like. And it was the chapel for, being Principia, by the way. Christian Science is a version of Christianity, slightly different than the mainstream version. And then we see some of the dorms, and the students were given, again, including the staff that work there that had to live there, because it's not near any decent sized town. Well, actually, it's across the river from St. Louis, but not directly. It's like 30 miles north of the nearest, or maybe 20 miles north of the nearest bridge. So if you work there, you probably were living there on the staff, and they got equal care in their quarters. And these are some of the classrooms. You can see the big old trees there as old as. And then we'll end up with this last view here, which is the last house that Hearst hired Judy Morgan to build. And it's in Beverly Hills, and it was hidden. So far off the beaten path, off the grid in that, I mean, historical grid. There were no records to prove that it was, and I find this as is, some of you have done your own original research for your papers beyond just the internet. In-person research is not easy. Sometimes it takes so much time and energy, and now with the pandemic, it's not as practical. But this was a house I was determined to find, and I was in LA twice with the photographers at different times, either one or both of them. And when we finally, this was Monica Lee, took this picture, we decided we were just going to knock on the door of the house that fit the description. And I had some kind of a drawing of it. It's the last house that William Randolph Hearst hired Julia Morgan to design before he passed away. And Marion Davies outlived him. Well, she was over 20 years younger than him. I think it was 25 years, by decades. And she lived in this house, I believe, until her death. He died 51. So that, doing the math, it had been well into the 70s. Well, we knocked on the door to see if anyone knew anything about it. A very elegant elderly woman answered the door, and she was totally, my dad had a phrase, compass mentis, it's Latin for completely there, totally focused. She was in her mid-90s. She said, not only is this the Marion Davies house, and William Randolph would stay with her here sometimes when it was LA, and sometimes she got to come down by herself or meet friends and family here. He gave her some freedom. In other words, when she chose to, she could have time, a week or so at a time, maybe even a month in the summer, to come down to LA, and he would join her for part of the time. But I was her, how did she describe it? Not servant, but this woman had been, a caregiver for Marion Davies, and she was still alive. Here we're talking about, even though this was already about 2006, this house was 1940. So what is that, 66 years later? And here's a woman in her 90s, as sharp as could be. And she said, I can tell you that Marion Davies admired Julia Morgan as a fellow woman artist in a way that she didn't respect a lot of the other women in film and other careers where she had met women who were successful, because of just the way she cared about her clients, and everyone included, and this woman said this, including me, because I was going to be her helper and caregiver already when this house was designed. It was already clear that William Randolph was, pretty old and wasn't going to be around a lot longer. So Julia Morgan designed the woman that met us at the door, her quarters separately, and in the will, Marion Davies left the house to her. Now that woman's long gone, I'm sure by now. But that was a real, she advised in the living room and told us these stories about what he was like, and what I couldn't repeat some of them, and they did go into my book, except the fact that this house at the time the photo was taken around 2006 was still occupied by someone who was a direct, connection to William Randolph and Hearst and Marion Davies, and took care of Marion Davies for decades after Hearst died. And the house is in the Tudor style, like houses in England. The only difference is being in LA, it's got white stucco, for keeping the heat out. And it's a very simple version of this style. Some of you know what I'm talking about. But this has a particularly nice set of diamond pane windows. These are authentic details from, we're talking about Tudor. Some of you know there was a TV series, I was just watching it. It's pretty good actually, about the Tudors who ruled from the late 14 to the early 1600s. Henry VIII, the most famous one, and of course, totally a monster towards all the women in his life. But then someone very opposite of that to me is, of course, Elizabeth I, one of the world's most famous rulers. Totally ruled alone, chose not to get married, and ruled for 45 years, and was one of the most successful and popular rulers of Great Britain ever, and she was a Tudor. So this is the style during those years, the late 14 to early 1600s, that you'd see in rural England, or not just rural England, but in homes, outside the big cities. Okay, well, we got to 4:12, and I'm going to now stop to share. And like always, I stick around if you have questions about anything, not what we just saw. Basically, that it's self-explanatory. It's nothing you have to worry about. You won't be tested on. But about anything, a few people joined us after I finished the introduction. I don't want to repeat the whole thing, but remember your final is going to be on the 13th of December. That's 12 days from now, and it's in real time, and it won't be posted on YouTube, just like the midterm one. Same length, same number of slides, and we'll review for it as a promise and cut the list down by about 40%. the study list, both for the terms to know and the slides on the syllabus. Okay, so anybody have any questions about or extra credit? I already mentioned, the architecture option is an easy one. Watching a movie, and writing a 2-page summary of what you learned about the life of an artist from a movie about or a document about an artist. Sending articles in, downloading either of my 2 art-themed novels. I'm going to, in more detail, I'll send you these options, brief explanation of each one. Those are worth, the articles 5 points, the architecture and the movie options 10, and downloading my novels worth 15 each one. And then, of course, you still have, let's see, am I forgetting one of the options? I know I am, I can't remember. But if you have questions about extra credit at any point, feel free to ask. Okay, so do you have any questions, Jessica, about the extra credit options? That's what I was finishing. We're done with the optional slides selection. I want to tell you guys, I really think it's an encouraging sign that even though you aren't going to be tested on any of this information, at least I hope I open some or many, if not most of you, your eyes to the fact that architecture doesn't have to be some technical, boring thing, or just some preserved in amber historic site that you study in a textbook or online image. You can go out and see it in the real world. And right now, the extra credit option of architecture is one with the weather as good as we're having. It's 72 degrees here in December. Okay, so that those options are really easy. You just take 4 photos of any one site and you get 10 points. You can do that twice. Anybody have any questions now about anything relating to extra credit, grading? Of course, we're going to talk more in detail about the final. So on Monday, you want to know what we're going to do? We're going to see some slides. We're going to spend a whole day Wednesday, 1 week from today, reviewing for the final. And then no class the following Wednesday, the 15th. Right, you're done on the 13th. But on Monday, we're going to see some of the slides that my same photographer took of Frank Lloyd Wright's, and some of those are easily, in fact, a couple of them are in the North Bay that you could go see, like the Marin County Courthouse, right, in San Rafael, or one of his houses in San Anselmo. And you don't have to go inside, you can just take exteriors. So that'll be worth some, but just for fun, you don't have to take notes. That'll be from my book on Frank Lloyd Wright, and those slides that will show, same photographer, on Monday, and stick around like I always do for any questions you have. And of course, you can email me anytime. I'm not going out of town until after Christmas this semester, this fall. Okay, anybody else have any other questions? All right, thank you all for your interest.
Hey, Mark, I have a quick question.
Sure,
for you.
Go ahead. Yeah.
It's not about this particular class, but I think it's time for us to be registering for spring.
Yes.
I'm a new student to the campus, and I just wanted to ask you a couple questions about the art course progression.
Mm-hmm.
If you know anything about the other art courses.
Yes, I've taught them all, except women.
I can imagine. So these are real simple questions. Yours is the first course I've taken, so I just have 2 questions for you. There are courses called Art 3, 5, and 7A.
Those are drawing courses.
Okay, and I noticed that in spring they are taught online, and that kind of threw me.
Right.
I would have thought they would have been studio courses. Is it okay? Would you recommend that I take one or more of those online?
Well, if you want to either major or maybe minor, do they still have minors? They did when I was at UC Berkeley, at Cal State Hayward, East Bay. You could minor. Well, no, I was there for a master's, but as an undergraduate, either major or, if you still can, minor in art history or art. That'd be studio art. They're 2 different degrees, of course. Then you might want to, but if you're just doing it for your own interest and you're more interested in learning about a broad overview of what types of art that were then in the art history classes, I mean, that's just the way it is. I'm teaching a different class. No, I'm not. That's right. It's this one. This is what they gave me. They gave me the same course to teach, which I'm not complaining. It's an in-person class. And at this point on campus at night, on Wednesday nights, I'm teaching the ancient one. But next semester, I'm teaching 2 other classes, and you could online, it's working for you guys, right? I mean, I like these.
No, it's for the history. I'll call them for art history courses. I think it's fine. I was just curious. Those are 3, 5, and 7A are basically beginning drawing classes.
Yes.
Is that okay? Cool. And then my other question was, they list 4 art history courses, 1-1-1-2 and 2-1-2.
Yes, yes.
I took,
there's-
I took 1 point, I'm taking 1.2 with you. Can I take 2.1 or?
Yes,
to
I'm
be-
teaching that next semester, and it's the same system of grading, same level of requirements.
Is that the same as 1.1?
And it's online, so that makes that
Yeah.
the same, kind of presentation as you've just seen. And I like teaching that because in that class, I show slides of my trips to Egypt, including what it's like to go up close to the Great Pyramids. And then I didn't take a picture inside the Great Pyramid, but there's this couple stories that have to do with what happens if things go astray in that area or in the streets of Cairo and also Rome. These are places I have my own slides where you don't need to take notes and you can just relax. So like the last 20 minutes, 20 or 5, we've done that a little bit in this class, but not much. I don't have as many slides of the period from the Renaissance on that have been made to digital files, but I have lots of those there. So that class has less total slides each week. In fact, I've been told I'm supposed to increase the number of slides each week. There's no state requirement for that, not that I can find. So it's actually, I'm not gonna say it's an easier course. No, the grading is the same. The requirements are the same. So you already know how to do the papers. And yeah, I'd be happy to see you and anyone else in that class because it kind of fills in the blanks from what we didn't cover from everything before this class, you see.
So I'm saying, here's my question though. If I'm taking 1.2 now, can I take either 1.1 or 2.1, or are those different courses?
Okay, they are. And those are 1.1 is world ancient to medieval world art. So the difference is that we spend a good chunk of the class, not quite half, but at least a third of the lectures are on things we don't cover in the Western. 2.1 is just Western ancient.
Oh,
to
okay.
medieval.
And the other is world.
Yeah. So for instance, we cover what was happening in China. I like that course a lot. Now I've been to China, but the slides I have there are just the professional ones from the slide library or from the textbook publisher, which are in Stockstead. So that would be China, India, Africa, pre-Columbian America, and those are fascinating topics that we don't cover in 2.1. We do cover Islamic architecture in both classes because Islamic culture is a bridge between East and West. Well, if you ever go to the Middle East, that's really what that part of the world is and so I show my own slides from the parts of the world I've been to in both of those 2.1 and 1. I think my memory, yesterday, I just confirmed my assignment. I've been overwhelmed with other stuff. I've already said what those things were. I've had to respond to this multi-page document that was alleging things that weren't in. They were telling me I had no right to give field trips during the, I didn't get, have I given a field trip? Where did they get that idea?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the advice. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So in other words, yes, if you want to choose between those two, I'd love to see you in either one, but I know I'm teaching 2.1. I can't remember, but I think they assigned me both 1.1 and 2.1. I've taught them both multiple times. So be happy to see any of you in either class.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions that we haven't already covered about grading, art history, or future? Yeah, remember, the deadline, not the deadline, the opening of the option to sign up for the classes in the fall is coming, I think, next week. So if you do know you want to take it, don't wait till after Christmas because they can cancel classes if they don't have enough, A, or B, a few times they get popular enough that it get full before the week prior to the class. So don't wait till early January if you know you want to take one of those. Okay, I hope I'll see some of you then. I'll see you all, I hope most of you on Monday. Okay, and we'll do the Frank Lloyd Wright slides and then review for the final. Okay, goodbye, everybody. Have a good weekend. All right.